So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, according to your time zone. And welcome to this Kalmar Webinar named Powerful Tools for Testing, Optimizing, and Training. So before starting our session today, I would like to share some practicalities. So during the session, all participants will be automatically muted. Please feel free to drop questions on the chat window at the right side of your screen. And if you face internet issues or some connectivity issues, don't worry, this session will be recorded and shared afterwards. So your host for today, my name is Christopher. I am part of the Kalmar Terminal Design Services team, and these days I am currently supporting customers worldwide on identifying the right level of automation and eco-efficiency based on the customer operational needs, financial, and environmental. And today we also got two interesting guests, Lucia Ramos and Tommy Tulkari. And before they introduce ourselves, I will explain why interesting, and it's because Lucia and Tommy have been involved not only in the solution development within Kalmar, but also on the project delivery, and especially this day that we are hearing a lot about digital transformation, customer trying to identify the right level of automation, customers evaluating different type of power sources. It's really interesting to be aware of all these simulation and emulation tool that can, help on this decision making. So with this being said, Lucia and Tommy, welcome to the virtual stage.
Thank you, Chris. And hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Lucia Ramos, and I am currently part of the product management team in the Kalmar Automation Solutions. I have been in the terminal industry automation for about 13 years and with Cargotec Group for 10 years. So I've worked at different sites like the TOS with Navis and also with automation here at Kalmar. And yeah, I currently work with the Kalmar One fleet management system, and also with Scenario Modeler, which is the emulation tool that we use. And that's why I'm really looking forward for today's conversation.
Hello, and welcome also from my behalf. I'm Tommy Tulkari, working now with the AutoStrat product management and having many years of background from the automation system itself, the automated cranes, and various positions in our delivery projects. So happy to be here with you and share this valuable time.
Awesome. So Lucia, Tommy, the plan for today is that we have been put together some questions here, and we will go through them, and please be open and share all just the best practices over here. But before jumping into our main topic of today, I always like to start asking this question, so I will take the chance. So how would you describe container terminal operations in one word?
In one word, for me, that would be choreography, because the terminal environment is really a large sequence of steps and moves where everything is kind of synchronized and interconnected. So it really reminds me to a choreography when I'm looking at the operations. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, I would say that it's like a team figure skating. It's actually 3 words, at least in English, 1 word in Finnish. Sorry about that. But I think my answer is quite aligned with the Lucia's one, because there in the team figure skating, everybody and everything have like a crucial part as a part of the team and part of the system, which is then forming something like a beautiful, which is just flows. And in case everybody or everything is not in synchronized, the whole end result is suffering. In figure skating, we are not meeting the score. In operational performance is then not met in a terminal environment, and also in a team figure skating, sometimes accidents do happen. Sometimes you might face a broken bone, and something more severe might happen.
Yeah, interesting. And well, if you ask me, I will say complex. And even though the terminal operation is like a link from the whole supply chain, I may say there is so many interactions, so many sub-process with different stakeholders within the terminal, and especially, these days a lot of disruption, and it really makes it quite complex, not only from the operational point of view, but also from the planning point of view. So let's go now into our next question, the main topic for today. So what is the difference between simulation and emulation?
Yeah, I would say that there is it's like a three different layers of operation. I think, for example, here on the right hand side, we could say that it's like simulated environment where we have everything like captured in the one like an imaginary box, where then, for example, in the left hand side we have for example the piece of like emulation, which is having the certain parts from the real world, but some parts are then simulated. For example, in many cases in our industry and our cases, especially today, the actual software what we use is the real one, where then the machines, for example, are simulated. And of course, in a certain environments or setting, we could simulate then what the operators and for example the integration to other system. And then the third, let's say, kind of a box or method would be, of course, the real world, where nothing is simulated and it's all real and it's all the same software what we use every day to operate the port.
Got it. And how about you, Lucia?
Yeah, I mean, when applying, the concepts that Tommy explained in the terminals in the everyday, we would use, for example, simulation for training the staff on how to drive and operate certain equipment. The simulation will imitate the real machine moves, but it's not really going to move any physical container. So it all happens in a closed environment, like Tommy explained. Simulations are also great for modeling and for creating forecasts of congestion or evaluate the effects of certain changes in layouts, for example, or number of equipment, etc. Emulation, on the other hand, is used to replicate a somewhat complete terminal environment using an actual software component that is running in the terminal. Of course, that simulators are needed to simulate this equipment, these moves that we talked about, or also the same TOS system, the actual TOS system can be used, as well as the equipment control system in this case. And of course, in the actual container terminal, we would replace all the simulations with actual drivers and equipment. But of course, we would keep that software that we're running in the emulation to be tested. So maybe that helps to sort of get a more tangible image of what we talk about in the terminal environment in the everyday.
Yeah, really interesting thoughts, and it is really important to be aware of all the multiple ways we can use simulation and emulation. But now jumping into our next question, so then why do we need simulations?
I can take that one, and I would say that the simulation is the quicker or quickest method to evaluate like a different operational concepts. For example, different equipment types or level of automation. And also with that kind of with that simulation, we can also get like the first like a feeling how this different layout would work for that particular terminal footprint, for example, and maybe it will start to like raise questions which you can then think about it, which methods you can find the answers for those like a more detailed questions. Are you using the emulation or for that one, or do you need some other means?
Yeah, another example that I can think of in this of using simulation is when the terminal wants to undergo this transformation in terms of study whether it's cost competitive to go from a straddle yard into an RTG yard that can provide more capacity, right, for storage. In this case, the simulation would enable to model all those changes and evaluate, well, if I get such volumes, then it's more cost competitive, if not, etc. All this before doing any civil work or actually buying any machine or undergoing any, investment, especially, and disruption of the terminal that all of this means, right?
Yeah, really interesting point here, and it's, I may say, it's a really useful tool to avoid assuming, and just as Tommy mentioned.
Yeah, any considerable change in a terminal layout would make sense to have a simulation done first.
Yeah, and I think that is a really like a good point, that even like the, let's say, existing terminals who are not changing the operational concept, they can also benefit then from the simulation before they do any like a major changes. For example, change the orientation of the stack or something, then the simulation would be used, for example, there. So maybe Chris, question to you, that how many different like terminal simulations we roughly do in a year?
Yeah, well, we're talking about 5 to 7. I may say that the target or the scope of the simulation may be different according to the region. In most of the cases in the Americas, we will see some level of customers looking to different level of RTG automation, for example. In Europe, we can see customers using simulation tools to verify different power sources, migrating to a hybrid up to a full electric equipment. In Asia, we will have this comparison of automatic guided vehicles versus auto shuttles. So all these type of comparisons, but really interesting. And I may say this is a really case by case according to the region. So we got clear like the difference between simulation and emulation, but then why do we need emulation? Any thoughts, Lucia?
Yeah, I mean, emulation, for example, enables us to benchmark the performance of our, for example, scheduler or certain products. Also to fine-tune the settings, because there are different settings that you can adjust, especially on the equipment control side, that can provide you better results. So it allows you to try and test that and refine. Yeah, as mentioned, yeah, for example, we use emulation to simulate the toss, the GOS, equipment moves from the QC. We need all those simulators, the OCR readings when we are emulating. So in the end, you are testing a lot of integration, right? With the actual software component that is the most critical one, let's say, in the work, in the emulation that you're doing. So.
Got it. And how about you, Tommy?
Yeah, I think the mainly I would say that the emulation is used in those deliveries where I have been involved is for the quality assurance testing, so QA in short, to ensure that the integration between the systems are working. Of course, like Lucia explained, that it happens in the delivery phase, but also then in let's say on the lifetime of the terminal, when we do the constant like updates, or whenever the updates wanted to be rolled out, that can be tested there with the emulation environment before rolling that to the actual production. Of course, the emulation system is also a good like a tool to train the fresh operators and then already like to optimize the existing operations. So I would say that is the key things where I would use the emulation. And now we can look at the short video about the emulation run and how that looks like. And
great.
I need to... So here we can see the actual piece of software, for example, the graphical user interface, where the people can then also drill into the certain machine details and understand then also with the speeded up operation how the different, let's say, parameters, for example, play out. And here all the actual software is working there in the background with certain simulated, for example, key cranes, and possibly simulate also the work use from the terminal operating system. There's also capabilities to do some like a fault injection, especially to manage the exception handling then for the operators, so they know what in certain conditions what they need to do to keep continuing the vital operation of the automated machines. And also they get like this kind of a good feeling which kind of information is generally available. For example, on the container like an inventory, for example, and what kind of these machine details you can open up and so on. So really good the pieces of information before letting the guy, for example, the control room.
Yeah, really interesting, Tommy. And you know, we got I will really love to have like a lot of greenfield cases, but the reality is that there are quite few worldwide, and most of the cases, it's conventional terminal cases. So this question go really, into the spot. So are these tools mostly used on automated terminal projects, or are they also useful for conventional terminals?
Well, both really, right? Emulation is typically more associated with automated terminal deliveries because we tend to test the ACS and the integration with the TOS. But simulation is applicable to all, right? Simulation is about modeling, it's a modeling tool. So you can really take that as a baseline to measure the impact of any change. Whether you're considering to deploy more equipment or different type of equipment, more or less people working. It can be about the financials, it can be about the CO2 impact, it can be about many things. So it's definitely applicable to both.
Yeah, and also if I may add over here, Lucia, the reality is that in most of the terminals, there is no room for, testing on a real case scenario, it's too risky. So these tools are really useful to test those changes and, have the less impact in the current operation.
Yeah, that is so true. And all those tests, when they're done, they're very disruptive, so have a huge impact.
Yeah, so now if we are talking about, brownfield cases, so do you believe that these tools can be used as a planning, for planning purposes, like planning operationals on a daily basis?
Well, I would say that today those tools are not really used for that particular purpose. But I think we as a whole industry really should aim for that. And I think we could take an example from the Formula One race. So for every different track, you need to fine tune your plan, to do your settings, and then a plan how do you drive. I think for the vessel visit, we should do exactly the same thing. We should look how do we let's say optimize the decking, a bit of the yard strategy, how many machines we would apply for that particular operations, where we should place our key cranes, and not only considering the key crane productivity, but understand the whole thing, the system there, let's say behind the key cranes, and then of course we should operate accordingly, the driver should drive according to the drive plan. And then when we have done all that and we have executed the race, or we have executed that vessel, we should have a look on that how the plan, what we did using these particular tools, how did it went, and how we could actually improve our work in planning so it would fit even better than for the next race or for the next vessel.
Yeah, fully agree with you, and you just make me remember my old days at the terminal. But I may add that there are two critical aspects if you want to really deploy these tools on the terminal. The first one is you really need to understand the way of working, because in most of the terminal, it's vessel after vessel, and that's only one piece. You also got the gate and the train, barges, many others. But at the same time, to deploy these solutions, you really need a lot of development, people and skills to be able to use these tools in a proper manner. But let's move forward. And well, we just explained the differences when we need simulation, emulation, but then how as a Kalmar do we support emulation?
Yeah, so I guess that's for me.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have a specific product that is part of Kalmar One automation system for emulation that I mentioned at the beginning in my presentation. It's called Scenario Modeler, and that basically is composed of 4 different modules. To describe them briefly are the Emulation Platform Management System, or EPMS, which is basically the product that handles all the configuration setups of the scenario. We're able to store scenarios, replay them, get some statistics after running the different plan scenarios, introduce exceptions, for example. It allows a lot of things in the configurations. Then we have the external simulators to simulate external inputs such as the GOS, the OCR, and others. Then we have the chase simulators, which are equipment simulators for manual equipment like the QC, for example, that is part of every flow, regardless what type of equipment you have deployed in your terminal. And then the fourth is the training manager. So we have been mentioning training a lot. And for remote operator training, is a very powerful tool.
Yeah, you know, I really like especially the training aspect, and it's really critical. And you already mentioned this one, but it's so cool that you can start testing, you know, like the integration of the automation and different aspects without having physical cranes on site. But then again, Lucia, this goes for you that you're more focused in the product development within Kalmar. So how do you really use these emulation tools during the development process?
Yeah, I mean, of course we use it. I mean, not for every development, but for to assess the impact of performance in the development, sorry, of a new feature is the perfect tool to use, and we have to use it. I mean, we have the tool, and we are improving our product to be reach higher performance. Of course, we have to use this tool, right? Yeah, and also it especially allows to test like large number of moves with different you know, terminal settings that otherwise you wouldn't try, as you mentioned, until you are already in production, and you can cause a huge disruption. So yeah, it's a must when you want to really impact the feature and assess if it's doing what it's supposed to do at a larger scale, especially, right? Which is sometimes this difference that we find that you tested, you have your end unit tests, your unit test, sorry, and then you know, integration, everything goes fine, but then you deploy something and it's not working quite as expected. So that's exactly why we should do a lot of emulation when deploying these critical features.
Really interesting, and well, I also know you mentioned this one, but we also got capabilities, you know, to only not focus on the Kalmar side, but also include different parties involved in the, you know, in the big picture when we're running the terminal. So now, following question over here, and you know, in which cases should we use simulation, and in which cases should we use emulation? You know, like this is a must to run an emulation.
I would say that the simulation is I'd say a must, but that is the most obvious tool when we look at after those operational concepts, the level of automation. When we think about the investment amount and this kind of a when we look at the on a high level, what it would be the operational cost, and having these to have like the business case then justified, and for example give some like a more visual then for the authority approvals and things like that, to take those to the next level. So I think the simulation is really giving a good like a base for that one. Then at the emulation, I think then when we take it to a more detailed level, I think the main things would be that for example, ensure that the integration work already in an early phase, for example, of the deployment. But also I think it would be like a brilliant tool to check that is there any gaps in the system or in the integration when you do your like end-to-end business flows for your particular site. And then I think additionally, I would in a way hope that our customers, so the terminal operators, the procurement and so on, they would require more this kind of a terminal emulation from the automation system suppliers during the tendering phase. And I think with that kind of a, let's say, model, we would get like the positive pressure to show that first of all the system does exist, what we are selling, and then that all of these kind of required functionalities would be there, and then of course we could also look at the certain performance what we could achieve with that particular layout and with that existing system in the emulation. So that would be like what I would like to also give to you so that you can challenge us.
And
I don't know if this makes sense to you.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Tommy. I think it would be very, very, very interesting sales processes if we had to actually do that. I think it would be great. It would drive the game much higher for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, if I may add here, in the last 2 years, I may say we got many simulation cases, not only for C terminals, also, you know, empty depots, intermodals. At least I may say there are many customers evaluating older projects with simulation tools. But when we talk about emulation, I may say quite few. This, so to say, reach that level of integration testing and all those stuff, you know. But it will be really cool to see more and more emulation cases worldwide. And I may say that one of the big mistakes, you know, is like most of the customer will say, yeah, this is expensive, but at the end, you know, you can get a lot of value from a simulation and even more from an emulation. But one of the biggest mistakes is to go into a simulation and then shelf, you know, the whole. Once you finalize the study, just shelf the whole layout. But at the same time, there are all, you know, other customers using these simulation tools, and on a year or monthly basis, they are like checking these tools, monitoring. Even if they make changes on the layout, they come back to us like, hey, can we adjust this? And it's really cool, this type of interaction and how value they can get from these tools. So let's keep moving, and you know, probably a lot of our audience will be asking this question, and let's just go for it. So KPIs. So when we run this type of simulation and emulation, how about the KPIs? So what KPIs we are currently measuring with these tools? So any thoughts here, Lucia?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it depends, but typically they're operational KPIs, right? Which they are either related to performance or cost. In the scenario modeler case, we provide the QC moves per hour, which is a very widely used KPI. But we do aim to offer more KPIs out of the box in the near future. We realize it's really important to be able to have, you know, the good numbers to compare each run and so on. So yeah, we recognize the importance to have those numbers to be able to take the right decisions after you're doing this emulation or simulation.
And how about you, Tommy?
Yeah, maybe to add on that, I think our goal would also be like the invest a bit so that we can provide the KPIs, which is something, for example, which would be more aligned in the scope of supply what we would have when we are providing the equipment and the equipment related automation. And for example, by this I mean, for example, we could aim for the lane availability KPI, which would then represent, for example, a time when there would be a container under the back bridge, so what the key crane can load like all the time, and then we would like start to measure that particular availability number, because that would be the actual the border or the edge of our delivery scope. So in general, of course, we need to provide those key crane moves and other like key performance indicators what Lucia was stating, but also we need to be like understanding the typical scopes so that we could understand where we can then, for example, commit as a supplier.
Yeah, got your point. And if I may add here, as I told you, we are supporting customers worldwide, and something that I, you know, face quite a lot is that the reality is that the KPIs are measured in the same way. So we need to adjust to the customer way of working, and it's, so to say, quite tricky. But at the end, it's quite positive. You know, positive that there are a lot of initiatives these days that they are working to create this type of standards on how you measure a move, how you measure a cycle, and defining all the terminal KPIs. So that's really interesting topic going on. But normally when we talk about simulation and emulation, we focus quite a lot on operational KPIs. But what about CO2 emissions, especially these days that there is a lot of pressure increasing in legislations regarding the environmental aspects. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think the simulation is a really good tool to use multiple purposes. For example, to having that kind of an indication of the CO2 amount of the operation. And of course, there are like the other aspects as well, what we could consider like the noise pollution and light pollution, or vibration and shocks, especially if the terminal is planned to be next to the suburbs or something like that. And also the energy usage of the whole site and which kind of energy we use. But also then what we should consider is that how much people and operators we need locally. And now especially what COVID has taught us about the remote work, maybe some people can operate more from home or from other remote places. So have like some kind of understanding of that as well, where the work should be done to run that planned operations.
Yeah, and if I may add here, many of our customers in Europe and in some states in the US, they are evaluating especially this aspect of using these tools to evaluate CO2 emissions, comparing different handling concepts, creating CO2 reduction roadmaps to meet target to the next 5 or 10 years. So it's really interesting, all these, so to say, features you can use this with these tools. Sadly, we are almost reaching an end for this topic. We can spend all day. I'm really passionate about this topic, but again, this is like a must-ask question, and I am 100% sure our audience will love this one. So, Tommy, how much should you rely on the result of simulation and emulation?
I let Lucia go first.
Because he knows what I think. Well, the results of the simulation are always a good indication of what reality will behave like, right? But they are produced in a vacuum. We have been talking about that already. So we always need to keep in mind that it is a controlled experiment, whereas in the terminal there's a lot that is out of the control of the scope that we're trying to test, right? And the human factor that is, it has to be considered always.
Yeah, but I think there's of course good mechanisms in place to make the emulation and the simulation more accurate, especially when we do the deployment, or especially in the lifetime of the whole terminal. So what we have, for example, experienced that we can run the so-called kinematic tests, where when the site is already there, we can run that particular machine in a certain specific route. And then we do exactly the same in the emulation, and we ensure that the emulation, for example, environment, that particular identical move is not executed any faster than in the reality. So in this way, we can ensure that the simulator values are right.
Yes, I mean, even if we inject exceptions, which our tools allows in the scenarios, so you expect a machine to have a certain percentage of failure, etc., we are not able to reproduce 100%, the complex, as we mentioned at the very beginning, environment of the container terminal. So all I'm saying is that these KPIs that we obtain can be compared with the real world KPIs, right? Because there are always simulations embedded in there, right? And also limitations of how much we can adjust, etc., right? Even if it's a good simulation or emulation. But the results are meaningful, right? Are meaningful in the sense that, for example, a feature improvement under emulation, if it produces an increase in productivity, you can expect an increase. Now, exactly how much that overall increase is going to be, that's what you cannot compare like for like, and that is not as clear, right? But anyways, obviously I believe in the power of and the use of emulation and the simulation tools, as I said.
Yeah, That's really interesting. If I may add over here also, you know, we normally, even though we're using the same simulation and emulation tools, we treat greenfields and brownfields in a different way. I may say the brownfields are a little bit more tricky, and just as Tommy mentioned, we need to go as real as possible. So we need to be aware of local deviation, delays, and really calibrate the model before testing different operational concepts. So I think that that's the way forward here.
So maybe still like a clarification question to Chris for you. So when we do have like our work done, for example, in the simulation or emulation, and we have that package to be handed over to the customer, how they typically analyze then the results and how they digest those results?
Yeah, quite cool question, I may say, and I got 4 points over here. So the first aspect is that once we deliver these results, we will go with the customer, and the first thing we will take a look is into the you know, the basic inputs from the whole overall scenarios, and then the customer will also take a look to the big picture. And by the big picture, I mean, yeah, they will take a look into the isolated results for the water side operation, for example, train, gate, warehouses, customs, and many others. But they will always keep this big picture in mind, because they want also to take a look into how the overall equipment is behaving on a specific scenarios. I got another point over here that they will not focus like, okay, we need to achieve 35 regarding productivity. No, they will always focus on a range between 30 to 35 or 35 to 40, because just as we have been mentioning, this is still an isolated testing. And finally, after they take a look into all those aspects, they will come back to us, and for sure they will ask to customize some details and try different permutation into the simulation run. But that's like in an overall what they will do after we deliver these. So to summarize our discussion for today, I may say that simulation and emulation tools can really be used not only for automation or automated projects, but also to conventional ones. These tools, both of these tools, help us eliminate assumptions. They can be used in the UAT or user acceptance testing phases during the product development, just as Lucia mentioned. For the brownfield, it's really useful because you can optimize operations. When we are talking about greenfields, you can test new technology that you will be deploying. I really love these training purposes because it's really cool to be testing all these changes before you got deployed in the physical terminal. And finally, we can really improve terminal planning, and we hope to see more and more this approach in the upcoming years. So let's go now into a Q&A session, and I would like to invite all the attendees to just drop their questions in the chat at the right side of the screen. Let me check here the questions.
Yeah, at least there's one question which is really related a bit on the integration, and it's more specifically on the TOS integration. So the question goes that, does a terminal have to be using a specific TOS for this to work, or is it open to all? I would say that there our, let's say, emulation environment, of course, can be either used in a standalone mode, or it can be used in the integrated mode. In case we, of course, in the standalone, we don't need any terminal operating system to run that one and get the results. With the integrated one, there we would prefer to have the open Kalmar key interfaces, and as long as we use that one, we can really easily out of the box run those scenarios with the multiple different terminal operating systems. There are certain terminal operating systems where we have built more like a scripting capabilities and things like that, so it goes a bit more smoothly, but there's nothing which is preventing us to work with any TOS vendor. And as I would still like to highlight that the Kalmar key baseline interfaces would be the quickest and most like a reliable method to go forward, as those are already proven in the operation in multiple sites.
Got it. And we got another question here. What do you consider is the main challenge when executing simulation or emulation projects?
I think the one is then that how, in a way we touched it a bit, but how realistic the results are, especially when we consider when you have went to from the simulation to the emulation already, or maybe actually it does apply to both. So we should not, in a way, wait for something like a miracle. We should have like a realistic expectation what our, let's say, piece of land and with a certain equipment can do. Also, we should not assume that any a new technology is available or something like that. And like we talked about that fault injection type of thing, that is something what we should keep in our mind, that things do happen. It's not only equipment reliability, there are other things as well which is impacting the terminal conditions, like how your payment is, what is your wireless network coverage, for example, and other various items which can bring certain uncertainty for the number, for example, of one shift or something like that. So I think that we just understand that how, let's say, isolated that is, and have a realistic view when we see those such pure numbers in a report.
Yeah, got it, and fully agree there. We got another question here. So what will be your advice to terminal operators worldwide looking to become greener and automated? Well, I can jump into that one, and based on our experiences within Kalmar, I may say that before you reach the simulation and emulation phase, so to say, there are some previous phases you need to evaluate. I may say first you need to consider different operational handling concepts. Once you got a clear idea of those 2 or 3 options, you really need to validate this via a strong business case, putting all the numbers on the table. And then once you got those 2 aspects ready, then you can start using these simulation and emulation tools. And as you mentioned, from the greener aspect, there are many things you can do with simulation, especially to test what will be the CO2 emissions of each of those handling concepts. So really cool stuff you can do these days with these tools.
Yeah, I see that there's another one here that maybe I can take. How is the tool typically managed going forward post-deployment? Does Kalmar have to be involved in each run, or can the terminal experiment independently? Yeah, definitely they can continue to experiment independently, and hopefully that's something that, you know, as Tommy mentioned at some point, that becomes part of the day-to-day activities of the terminal. But yes, both in the case of the simulations, they shouldn't be shelved, like Christopher mentioned at some point. In the case of the emulation as well, you can save scenarios, run them in a different time, under different conditions, under different weather conditions, for instance, or all those conditions where you know that you haven't experimented in the past. Yeah.
Great, and well, sadly, we are already running out of time, and I would like to thank you, Lucia and Tommy, and all the audience joining us today. And it will be great if we can hear more about your specific cases. And as always, you are welcome to share your thoughts, and we are looking forward to hear your pains and needs. So really appreciate your time today. And if we didn't answer your question now, don't worry, we'll be answering those after this session. So thanks again, and stay safe.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you. Bye.
Good to see you. Bye-bye.